And the danger, of course, for us is when what is normal in our culture is contrary to a Christian worldview. So slogans like, love is love. All kids need phones. Don't ever tell anyone you think their ideas are wrong. Of course you can change your gender. Right? It's just presented as normal over and over and over again.
Welcome back to the Maven Parent Podcast. We just got off of an awesome weekend together here in Southern California at the Maven Conference. And it was a great weekend, really good talks, speakers, content, conversations. We heard a lot of good feedback from people who attended that they were encouraged and inspired and challenged. And so we're tired.
Yeah, we are tired, but it's a good tired. And but we just want you to know we're taking the break. We're taking a break from the podcast this week. No, we came on the podcast to tell them we're taking. Yeah, we just want to let everyone know, hey, this is it. We're done. See you guys next week. No, what we wanted to do though, the Maven conference. This is our 4th annual conference, and I think it's a fantastic event. If I do so say myself. See, I can't even speak correctly.
If you do say so yourself.
We're so tired. We are very tired. But yes, of course it's our event, but we think this conference is kind of unique. I mean, there's not a lot of groups out there that are equipping parents with the kind of biblical worldview, Christian worldview that they need to address the most contemporary issues that our kids are facing, that we're facing. And so that's what we're trying to do every year, is to say, hey, let's take truth and good Christian thinking and all the practical stuff we need, and let's bring it together, and let's bring out people who can communicate well, who think well, who can communicate well, and who also are men and women of virtue and character, who love God and can equip us. And that's what the conference is. And so year after year, the conference has grown. People are excited about what's happening at the conference. So I would encourage you to consider next year coming out for the conference. It is well worth it. Aaron promises a money back guarantee, right? You will give them back their money if they aren't happy. But what we wanted to do for this week's podcast is really give you a little taste of the conference, and we want to share with you one of our sessions. And I think you're really going to enjoy this session. So this week's podcast is brought to you by us via the Maven Conference.
So we are going to talk about the really important topic, I think, of how to build a family culture, how to build a family life that our whole conference theme is in the world. We are in this world, but how do we not just become of the world as a family? So if I had to choose one book besides the Bible, but if you said, Aaron, you get to choose one book that has had the biggest effect on your view of the discipleship of your kids, it would be Susan Schaefer Macaulay's book, For the Children's Sake. In the book, she says something about the subtle but really powerful impact a family can have that has struck me since I've read it, and I read it over and over again because it is so encouraging to me. But this is what she says. One of the greatest powers for good is a family whose members respect each other and who have learned to function, however poorly, with the rich concepts of the Word of God. The Word of God gives us as human beings. It is almost incredible to think of the stabilizing effect ordinary families can have, not only on themselves, but as a light in a troubled generation. I don't know about you, but just that part about the ordinary family, however poorly, that we aren't called, like, we don't have to be like these super Christians, perfect Christian family, but she's encouraging us in just the ordinary struggle of the family that we can have an impact. So, okay, so before we talk about that, I want to talk about this whole idea about creating a culture. And I'm wondering if any of you have ever thought about creating the culture of your family. So think about that. Like, what do you think is the culture of your family? So let's first think about culture more broadly to help us maybe think about our family culture. So what is culture? Well, in his book, Culture Making, Andy Crouch offers a simple but I think really helpful definition of culture. And he says, culture is what we make of the world. Culture is, first of all, the name of our relentless, restless human effort to take the world as it is given to us and make something else. So to flesh out the definition more, I think it's helpful to think about particular sorts of things about culture that make up culture. And so oftentimes it'll be broken into 4 categories. So if you think about it like this, so one thing about culture is ideas. So these are what, as a culture, we think are true, good, right, and wrong. Champions, so those are leaders in the culture who are enforcing or reinforcing these ideas. Institutions, so think of government, parents, churches, organizations. And then lastly, artifacts. So an artifact of a culture could be books, poems, music, clothing. We dress different in this culture than we did, 100 years ago, right? Buildings, how we build buildings, what they look like. So this is all, a part of culture. So how does culture shape us? Well, I think the most powerful way culture shapes us is that it just presents to us what is normal. And in the book Practical Guide to Culture that my husband Brett and John Stonestreet wrote, they talk about this illustration of water. And we're a beach family, so surfing, all of that. And when you're in the water, you're wet, but you don't even know it. It's just, and it's all around you. And so culture, it just all the time presents to us, this is normal. This is normal. And I think it happens so often, and it just presents what's normal that most of the time we don't even think about it, right? And I think a good example of culturally what's normal is, I live here in Southern California, and anytime someone says to me, yes, ma'am, what do you think I say to them? The first question I say is, oh, where are you from? Because I know they're not from here. Because nobody talks like that here, And I had one young person say to me, when I said, oh, where are you from? And he said, well, I'm from here, but my mom's from Georgia. And I was like, yeah, she is, and she taught you her culture, right? So even in our families, we have our own little family culture that shapes us. And this is something that we discover right when we get married about culture and families and what's considered normal. And I remember this the first year Brett and I were married and the first time we had to do holidays together, particularly Christmas. So I grew up in a home where one grandma lived next door, the other grandma lived less than a mile away, and then I had divorced grandparents, so a grandpa lived in LA. So we would wake up, do presents, go to one grandma's, have breakfast with grandma, go to the other grandma's, have lunch with that grandma, and then we'd drive to Glendale, and we'd have dessert with grandpa in the evening. So Christmases were busy, and we were going all over the place. My husband grew up driving from Maryland to Pennsylvania to stay at grandma's house for a week, and they laid around in sweats all day on Christmas, and they didn't go anywhere. So then we get married. And so I'm like, well, so in the morning we'll do this, and then we'll go to my parents, and then we'll drive to your parents an hour away. And he's like, no way. He's like, we're going to choose. What? And I'm like, who's going to choose? And then he's like, well, we'll just do one family 1 year, one family. And I'm like, absolutely not. If a family's optional, then that'll be your family. And are my in-laws in here? Okay, no, they're not. So we had this huge argument, and he's like, that will ruin Christmas to drive all around. And I'm like, who says? Who says that ruins Christmas? And I'm like, I'll drive if you want to sleep. I mean, is that the problem? But it was just what was normal to me and to him was so different. And it was so ingrained and not something that came up in premarital counseling, right? It's just the culture. It's just what's normal. And that's why it's so powerful. And the danger, of course, for us is when what is normal in our culture is contrary to a Christian worldview. So slogans like, love is love. All kids need phones. Don't ever tell anyone you think their ideas are wrong. Of course you can change your gender. Right? It's just presented as normal over and over and over again. And oftentimes, what C.S. Lewis reminds us in this wonderful quote of his is that the most dangerous ideas in our culture are not the ones that are being argued, but the ones that are just being assumed, right? It's just assumed. All kids need phones. All kids need smartphones, right? So how on earth do we step back? How do we get out of the water of our culture, dry off, and take a look at not only the culture around us, but our family and our home, and evaluate if we are a family that has a Christian worldview when it comes to our ideas, our institutions, our champions, our artifacts. And when you think about what a normal Christian family, like when you just think about a Christian family, what it maybe ought to look like, what are some of the distinctives that you think of? And do you think about it as a culture and not just like traditions of the holidays and things like that? And again, we're not talking about a perfect Christian family, because what we do is we always think of our family and then think about this family that we think is perfect. And that's what we compare ourselves to, right? I'm not saying we have to be super Christians. I'm suggesting that we just have to be intentional about our family culture and how we're forming it. And if we think about long-term, about shaping our family culture, I actually think it's exciting because you can think about a profound effect that you can have not only on your kids, but your grandkids and great-grandkids. That's the nature of culture, that you could actually influence generations of your family. So I want to get really practical, and I want to divide it up into two parts. So first, I just want to talk about how can we be in this world but not of the world? So I'm first going to talk about how we can be not of the world, how we can keep at bay the worldviews and ideas that are anti-Christian, that are not a Christian worldview. So it's because it seems to me a fundamental understanding of this is that we would lead lives that look different than those around us. If we are in a post-Christian culture, which we are, our lives ought to be distinguished, don't you think, from the people around us? Because they have different ideas about the world, different values of what's important. And so at least in some ways, we should stand out, and our families should reflect that. So I think a good way to think about it as parents and grandparents is in the context of discipleship, and I think that's where we should start. So how do we have a home that's intentional about discipling our children, and what does that look like in a culture like ours? Well, I think we first start with teaching our kids the true story of reality. And what do I mean that? I mean God's story. Who he is, what he's done, and what he will do in the future. Now, I know you're thinking, no duh, Aaron. Of course, we teach our kids the faith. But I don't mean that we just teach our kids the faith in the sense that most American Christians mean. Because a lot of us have reduced Christianity to a personal, private relationship with Jesus and a general moral code. And while this is absolutely important, our relationship with Jesus, the moral code of Christianity, but they don't accurately capture what Christianity is. So in his book, The Story of Reality, Greg Koukl explains it like this. So Francis Schaeffer is a theologian, and Greg Koukl says this: one of Francis Schaeffer's most memorable sayings was that Christianity does not start with Jesus saves you from your sins. It starts with, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Schaeffer's point was that Christianity cannot be reduced to a track or a technique for getting saved. It is a comprehensive account of the structure of reality, a relational and real-world account of the history of the universe, a verifiable storyline of the unfolding of the cosmos. What does he mean? Well, what he means is that when we teach our kids the Christian faith, we don't start with Jesus died for your sins. That leaves kids thinking, why did he do that? This is what I thought as a kid. I didn't get it. I grew up going to church. Jesus died for your sins. Okay, great. So when I sin, I'm forgiven. Okay, good. So then I just live my life the rest of the week, right? I had no understanding that Christianity actually should affect how I see every part of life. And so our kids need to understand that Christianity is an entire world view. It's an entire life view, and that it's the story of reality, what has really happened and what is happening and what is going to happen. And here's another quote from how Koukl describes the biblical story. He says, this is a story of reality, a story about things that really happened, or in some parts, things that are going to happen. It started a long time ago and will probably end long after you and I are gone. So the Bible gives us knowledge of reality, and this is how we present it and disciple our kids. So as a family, we need to understand the bigger story. God is creator. That's how it starts. He's the sustainer of everyone and everything. We are a part of God's creation. And that plan has been happening since the beginning of time. And that right now, we're just in this moment. And God is in control of all the moments, from the beginning to the end. When you think about reading the Bible as a family or to your children, do you think about it as just having little devotional times? Or maybe a little pep talk for the day? Or maybe a little spiritual nugget that we can walk around with for the day? It's not a proper view. It's not how the Bible describes itself. So we need to teach our kids the Bible because it gives them a true picture of the world we're living in even now. And I think the benefit of teaching our kids history, God's history, is so deep. But one author that I absolutely love is author of a children's history book, and it was written in 1924, so it's an old one. But I've read it with my kids, and I love it. But the author's name is V.M. Hillier, and this is how he talks about why we need to teach our kids history. And this is what he says. To give the children some idea of what has gone on in the world before he arrived, to take him out of his little self-centered, shut-in life, which looms so large because it's so close to his eyes, to extend his horizon, broaden his view, open up the vista down the ages past, to acquaint him with some of the big events and great names and fix these in time and space on the basis of a detailed study in the future, to give him a chronological file with main guides into which he can fit in its proper place all his further historical study. Isn't that so good of what learning history can do for us? So when we read about God's great faithfulness in the Old Testament, and provision and promises kept, and acts of justice and acts of mercy, we learn about God, the God who's still alive and who is over everything then and now. And learning stories of humanity past equips our children and reminds us of the truth of Ecclesiastes 1:9. What does Ecclesiastes 1:9 says? There's nothing new under the sun. So although our culture has different artifacts and champions and all those sorts of things, human beings haven't really changed. And if we forget this fact, then we can start to lose hope and despair and think that the world's falling apart all around us, right? We can think we're in unprecedented times where people are rejecting God and rebelling against him, and then that this has never happened before. And that can change us, right? It can really bring us down. But when we and our children understand the whole story of reality, it helps us to see everything in its proper place. We are in this world, in this current time and place, and that's not an accident either. Actually, John mentioned this last night, Acts 17. What does it say? That we and our children were chosen for this time and this place, and it's not an accident. Especially if God controls everything, right? We read the story of Esther to our kids. What does Esther remind us of? God chose her for that time and that place and put her in those circumstances. So the second thing I think that for a family to develop a culture that's different, not of the world, and I think this one really is very countercultural today, but I think having a proper order in our homes. So what do I mean by order? Well, first of all, I think order brings stability and harmony. And this is actually true in society, right? But it's also true in our homes. And actually, if we have a harmonious, ordered home, we will stand out in the culture. And if you're involved in families in your neighborhood at all, you know this fact to be true. So what do I mean by order? So proper order means what God has laid out in Scripture. God is over all. Everyone in the home answers to God. We are under his authority. And then parents, and then children. So we all answer first and foremost to God. That includes answering how we treat each other in our family. And that goes for us too as parents, right? We answer to God for how we treat our spouse. We answer to God for how we treat our kids. He doesn't give us liberty to treat the younger ones however we feel like that day. We're under his authority. Jesus is our model. But parents, God has structured it so that in the home, the order is that parents are the next authority under God over the children. And his desire is that children from a very young age learn this authority and are taught to obey their parents. Now, of course, it starts when they're very, very young. So we take the training of our children in the habit of obedience really seriously. And we teach them what is true, what is right, and we really just focus, especially in the younger years, on teaching them to obey. Now, of course, as they get older, then we have this foundation laid, and then now we start teaching them why these things are true, why we have the rules we do or the boundaries we do as a family. We start talking to them and adding explanation and justification for why we've been teaching them these things. And if we don't have that, then we're left going, shoot, I don't know why. right? And then we have to do some makeup work. But hopefully, when they're young, we're understanding our justification. We're understanding why. And we've all experienced a family or a home that is disordered in this way, where children are in charge and parents are lost to know what to do. Disorder causes chaos. It just does. We see it again in the big culture. Disorder causes chaos, and it's in the home. And again, John mentioned last night, I think he took some of my notes because he was mentioning a few things. I'm like, hey, talking about freedom, but do you remember what John said last night? He said, we are most free when we function within our design. So we are designed, all human beings are designed to be under authority, different authorities. But for children, for the young, being under their parents' authority is good. I also think, too, just as proper order of the homes, I think one thing in a Christian home is that marriage should be prioritized. That we are committed to marriage, and that the marriage of mom and dad is the most important relationship in the home, hands down. So as Christian parents, we are committed to pursuing each other, even when it's hard, even when we don't feel like it. We commit ourselves over and over again to forgiveness, restoration. We're committed to putting each other first above all other human relationships. Even our kids, even our relationships with our kids, over work, over all commitments. And I think, all of us know or maybe have lived in homes where divorce occurred. And I just know that seeing family members and friends go through divorce my whole life, it helps me to realize that prioritizing marriage is so vital for keeping a home in order and really stable. Because when a marriage crumbles, the whole house crumbles. And so we don't have to apologize for prioritizing marriage, for doing date nights and leaving the kids at home, getting a babysitter. That is good. And we need to do that. And when we realize we're going two different directions, two ships sailing at night, we're passing each other, we recommit and say, hey, we're not on the same page. This is the most important relationship. And of course, this blesses our children. Another way I think that we can be out of the world as Christian families, and that we should really think about when we think about our own family culture, is in the area of technology. So this is a huge, huge issue, and we have some good resources that I want to point you guys to. But first, as Christians, we view technology properly, or we should, that technology is an amazing creation of human beings made in God's image, who are co-creators with God. And there's so much good that comes from technology. Like, most of us ordered our coffee on it this morning. That's how we got here this morning. I mean, technology is awesome. And this is just Genesis 1:28. Be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth and subdue it. This is taking the materials of the earth and making things with it. So that is good. And I don't ever want my kids to feel like I'm always just, technology's the worst. And then at the same time, I'm using it all the time for emails, maps, everything. Right? So we should and communicate to our kids, oh no, I mean, this is good. This technology and all that it fits into a Christian worldview. So it's not inherently bad in and of itself. But if we aren't careful, technology, and more specifically screens, can become the most important artifact in our homes, right? And again, technology isn't neutral. So it's not like a car, that you put in neutral. This thing, although it's not inherently bad, But this thing moves us and shapes us. It either moves us towards good things, good habits, or it can move us towards really bad habits. I have noticed that I am more impatient than ever before, and I think I blame this because you can do everything so fast. So anytime anything is slow to load or my phone is not doing something I want it to do, I'm like, ugh, Micah, which is my son who fixes everything. But this thing has changed me. I am more impatient. Like even sitting at red lights. Do you know, I feel like sitting at a red light is a waste of time. So I might as well check an email real quick. Or this thing moves us. It moves us. And so we just need to be aware of it of ourselves and talk about that with our kids too. So there was the most prominent national study that was done by Barna Research in partnership with Impact 360, who's here. And they did a study on Generation Z, which is all of our children, or most of our children here, but people who are born from 1999 to 2015. So they surveyed over 1,500 young people on many different topics, but here's what they found about technology. So time spent on a smartphone each day, 5 to 6 hours. That does not include computers, video games, or watching TV or other things. That's just smartphones, 5 to 6 hours a day. Now, to their credit, 60% of Gen Zers in this study admitted that their generation spends way too much time on screens, which I thought was interesting. More than half realized that they spend too much time. But only 12% of those who were surveyed were classified as discerning when it comes to their use of technology. Discerning students were those who agreed that their generation spent too much time on the screens and reported feeling bad about their own screen use. So these young people were aware of some of the downsides, but that's 12%. So that means 88% didn't have any type of discernment in how they were using their technology. So you think about the potential impact on our kids, right, of this omnipresent technology that's everywhere, and it's just regularly presented to them, right? This is normal. This is normal. This is what we do. This is normal. So I looked up I'm a little behind on my slides. So I looked up this big TikTok user guide just to give us an example of how culture, in so many ways, just presents what's normal. And so I'll show you this video.
Hi, my name is John. You might know me as Chef John Kung, and my pronouns are they and he. TikTok has added pronouns on profiles, allowing all of us to refer to one another with ease, specificity, and care. So this is how you can add pronouns to your profile. For this feature, you'll want to head to the Edit Profile section of your TikTok page. There you'll see an option to add your pronouns in between your username and bio sections. You'll get to select up to 4 pronouns from a list of options. Once you've added your pronouns, they'll show up on your profile, right up at the top, under your name in a light gray font. Feel free to use whatever feels most authentic to you and your identity.
Okay, so why did I pick that one? Well, that guy has 1.5 million TikTok followers. And he just presented all kinds of ideas as normal, right? And you just think about, 1.5 million young people that he's influencing through this powerful thing of technology, and 88% of students who use it have no discernment. So here's the question. Who is in the best position to teach young people how to discern with technology? We are. Their parents. And really, who has the authority to even enforce any boundaries on technology? Well, we do. And because we don't want to be a family that is a slave to technology, which the culture is. And as parents, we are the ones who control our home. We get to decide what happens in our home. We don't get to decide what happens out there, obviously, but we do get to pick what happens in our home. So we are different. As Christians, we are different. So our use of technology should reflect that difference. And that goes for us parents too. And so our family's expectation should be that we will look different in how we use technology, how we live with the majority of people around us. That shouldn't surprise us, and we should expect that. So here's some practical things I think as Christian parents that should just be a staple in our home as far as technology. One, that we would delay our kids from having phones, especially smartphones, until they're older. That we delay it as long as possible. One thing I think that should be non-negotiable for Christian parents is that we would never allow screens in the bedroom. There is too many studies, there's too much research, and just wisdom alone says it's not a good idea to have screens in the bedroom. And that I think, and then another thing I think is that as families, we would prioritize time together, that we take breaks from technology, especially our phones. Meal times, car times, evenings, bedtimes, even vacations. We do that as a family too. We're going to go on a trip. Let's take a break from all the stuff and unplug. And if we do this regularly and we start it when they're young, it creates a culture in our home that actually does make that the normal. So, and one thing that we do is we purposely, when we are out in public, we purposely point out to our kids behavior that we want them to think is abnormal or not what we do. We'll say, like, because we have a rule, no phones when we're having meals together, right? So then when we're out together, we've all seen it, a whole family will be sitting there, everybody has a screen. And so we'll say to our kids, watch that family for a minute. And they don't talk. And it's sad to see, but we want our kids to see it. So we're purposeful about even narrating what's happening out in the public. And I know what I'm describing, even those three things, I just gave three little things, is difficult. Especially if you have a teenager in here. These are difficult. I have 5 children. I understand and know the power of technology. But we have got to have the courage to set up boundaries for the good of our kids. And I was reminded of the courage that it takes when I was talking to a local youth pastor here a couple years ago. And he was telling me about a group of boys in the youth group that he was meeting with that were struggling with pornography, specifically pornography that they were viewing on their phones. And he said that through tears, one of the boys said, I just wish my parents would take this thing away. And he said, all the boys agreed. And so I said, did they do that? And he said, no. I'm not saying it's easy. I know it takes courage. It's hard. But we have got to do it for our kids. Okay, the next thing I think that can help shape a family culture that is not of the world is a really simple one, and it's family dinners. It's having family mealtime as much as you can. The American College of Pediatrics, which is in no way a Christian organization or conservative by any mindset, there is so much data on this that it's just like, if you Google this, the benefits of family mealtime, you'll just be bombarded. It's just incredible. But the American College of Pediatrics sums up all the data they've found, concluding this: making the family table a priority from an early age can serve as a vaccine against many of the harms that come to children from a hurried lifestyle. So it lists some of the benefits. So there's tons of benefits. There's academic benefits, health benefits, less screen time just automatically comes when you eat together. And of course, you put the screens away. It decreases risk of drug use, of high-risk behavior. It improves family relationships. If you're struggling with your kids or one of your kids, think about having meals together more. If you're struggling in your marriage, think about having more meals together. Mental health, a huge problem right now. So many studies have shown that more family talk occurs during mealtime compared to any other activity. That's why it's so powerful, because when we sit down to eat together, remove distractions, we talk. That's the magic of the mealtime, right? So it gives us just, especially, we start our day and oftentimes we go in different directions. The kids leave for school, we go to work, we're all going different ways. Family mealtime offers a time to reconnect and have conversations. So of course, it goes without saying, block out distractions. And having a daily, if you can, or at least multiple times a week, a habit of stopping, seeing each other as parent and child, and just the power of the conversation. And that's like what I said in restaurants. I'll say to my kids, look, they haven't even talked this whole time. It's so sad. Not too far from here in Yorba Belinda is the Presidential Library of Richard Nixon. I don't know if any of you guys have gotten to go there, but it's kind of cool because they moved his childhood home from Whittier. They moved it on the property of the library. So you get to walk through this old home, and it's a fun way to study history. But when I was doing the tour one time with my kids, they had the family dinner table there, and the tour guide was telling us that Mrs. Nixon every day would cut out an article from the newspaper, something that was going on. And she'd set it on the kitchen table. And then when they all sat down to eat, she would read the article to her kids, and then they would discuss what was going on. And then Richard Nixon actually credits this practice of his mom for his knowledge of world events and politics and why he became so interested in it, all of it, and then, of course, ended up becoming president. How powerful. Just doing that. And another presidential library in California is Ronald Reagan. And when he was president in 1989, he talked about the family dinner table and the power of it. And this is what he said. He said, all great change in America begins at the dinner table. So what is he understanding here? Well, he understood that so much of how we are formed, who we are, is formed in our homes. And some of the most valuable time is that time where we are sitting and eating and sharing life together. And I love this topic so much. I actually did a whole talk on this, and it's on our YouTube channel, and I talk even more about different ideas and that sort of thing. So I will stop now, but if you want to hear me go on and on about it, you can check our YouTube channel or come talk to me later. The last thing I want to talk about in being a family that's not of the world is that we need to find allies. We don't have to do this on our own. We don't have to be a home that's isolated on an island all by ourselves and have nobody to help us in this endeavor. So first of all, being involved in a local church, it's just not optional. As a family, we have got to be involved in the local church. We need the church family, and the church family needs us too. It's a family relationship. That's what it is, right? So we need our brothers and sisters in Christ to help us in this endeavor of being not of the world. And we need people who have our backs, who won't leave us alone. I love how Monique talks about family. We are family, and we need to act like it, especially in this area. We can also find allies in Christian schools, in co-ops, with like-minded people who have similar values and goals. Of course, there's ministries, there's Maven, there are all the ministries that are here. We love Impact 360 and all that they're doing, and just coming shoulder to shoulder. They are allies to us, right? And we need to seek out allies. And given the aggressive, hostile, secular culture that we live in, coupled oftentimes with inadequate teaching and training that most of our churches offer our youth. This is why, a program like Impact 360 can be so helpful to us and be such an ally to us. And the last thing I want to say about all of this is that, of course, the younger we start, the easier all of this creating it to be normal is. If you're just, with your 2-year-old, if it's just like, oh, we obey mommy, this is what we do. It's so much easier than with a 12-year-old to say, okay, new rule, now we obey mom. I mean, if that hasn't been the rule, I would really encourage you to start that, and I'll talk to you about ideas on how to do that. But it's so much easier, everything we start, when they're younger. So start today, But if you do have older kids, like, I have older kids, all the time, I'll say, okay, new rule. We're starting something new. Mom just read a book, and now I have a new idea. So that's okay too, right? Don't tell them you heard this lady at the conference and in any way show them my picture, or so they will blame me. But okay, so just imagine it now, these things I've talked about, these different pieces, and if we implemented these over time, giving our kids a comprehensive Christian worldview so that they see all of reality through the eyes of a Christian worldview. Oh my gosh, my watch is talking to me. Technology. Actually, John mentioned last night too, I was going to mention Steve Garber's book, Fabric of Faithfulness, and he talks about 3 things that students who stayed faithful in their faith, and one of those 3 things was a worldview that was big enough to encompass all that they were seeing and experiencing in life. The other 2 were community and mentors, in case you're curious. So giving our kids that big picture worldview of Christianity. So imagine if we did that. If we had properly ordered homes where we have mutual respect, where there's respect for authority and for one another, where our homes have limits on technology, that it doesn't dominate it, that we use it as a tool but we aren't a slave, that we have regular family meals together, and that we are involved in a community of allies that are reinforcing all. Can you guys not see how powerful that can be to create a culture in our family? For some of you, that might feel overwhelming, but you can start with just maybe one of those things and start implementing it and see what happens. It takes courage and it takes intentionality. Okay, I want to just mention before we go to any Q&A, if you guys have any questions, I want to talk about just a couple things about being in the world. Because we are called, like Acts 17 says, we are in this time and this place. And so we are called to be and live here in this time and in this culture. So one thing that I think is a wonderful way as a family to live in the world is that we are a family that will be other-centered, and by being other-centered, it means that we will practice hospitality. Now that can trigger some of us, that word hospitality, because that comes with maybe a lot of baggage. We start thinking of like Pinterest and Instagram pictures of like a beautiful home that's serving a beautiful meal, and we're thinking, my house doesn't look like that because we live there, right? So I do want to encourage you to have people over for meals. That is part of it, but it is so much more. Hospitality is so much more than having people over for dinner, although I do want you to do that too. So my favorite book on this topic is by Rosaria Butterfield, and she wrote a book called The Gospel Comes with a House Key. And if you have not read it, you should. But here's what she says in the book, and I forgot to write the quote on the screen, I'm sorry, so you'll just have to listen to me. Okay, so this is what she says. Christian hospitality cares for the things that our neighbors care about. Esteeming others more highly than ourselves means nothing less. It means starting where you are and looking around for who needs you. It means communicating Christian love in word and deed. It means making yourself trustworthy enough to bear the burdens of real life and real problems. Isn't that a beautiful picture? And it's so much more broad than having people over for dinner. As a family, that we are looking outward, that life is not all about us. So yeah, part of that is opening our home. We see our home as a resource that God has blessed us with, and so we use that in our ministry to the hurting people around us. Of course, that means sacrificing time and treasure. I think kids should be a part of that. Putting things aside that they care about to do something for someone else. I think even financially, kids should be a part of that. For years, we've had a giving box in our house, and the kids put their giving money in there, and then we look for opportunities where the kids can give or want to give. One time that happened when we had a young couple over. They had just finished seminary, and they were moving back to Illinois, and they weren't even sure they had the gas money to make it there. So anyway, we're chatting, and then one of my kids pulled me aside when we were cleaning up the dishes and said, "Let's give them the money from the money box. We have like $150 in there." Now that would get you 1 tank of gas if you're lucky. A few years ago, that actually was helpful. So making them a part of this hospitality, right? So hospitality can be all kinds of things. Giving people's ride, loaning people your car when their car breaks down, watching your neighbor's house while they're out of town, bringing people meals when they're having hard times, visiting someone in the hospital, seeing if a hurting friend wants to get coffee, watching someone's kids so they can have a date night, or watching a single mom's kids so she can get some things done. You know, it's so big. Or be one of the few Christian families that will invite the Mormon or Jehovah's Witness missionaries that come to your door. They are coming to your door. They want to talk about spiritual things. Don't shut the door on them. Invite them in. Be nice. Offer them food and drink. Have your kids come and sit around the table with you and ask questions. Be hospitable. If you talk to Mormon and Jehovah's Witness missionaries, they will tell you how many doors get slammed in their face. We can be different. During COVID, one of our neighbors, with all the chaos that with schools were closing down, they have a friend who's a single mom. My neighbor homeschools. So she told the single mom, "Drop your kid off. I got it." And has been homeschooling her son this whole time. That's being hospitable, right? I mean, it's so break it out of the box of having meals together, although do that. Because actually no one does that anymore either. It's rare, I think, probably if we surveyed all of you, that anyone invites you over for dinner. It's rare, right? It doesn't have to be rare for us. Rosaria actually says in her book that the one app she uses on her phone is the Nextdoor app. Now, the Nextdoor app in my neighborhood is like crazy people ranting about politics and gas prices. So she was like, "I use the Nextdoor app." And I'm like, "You do?" And she goes, so what she does is every morning, she gets up, has her coffee, reads her Bible, does all this stuff, and then she gets her phone, and the first thing she does is check the Nextdoor app. Why? She looks to see if someone lost their dog, someone's car broke down, someone just had a baby, someone just lost their husband. So there's conversations going on that she can pick up, and she looks through and just has the posture of, where can I help? Who could I help? Is that the most beautiful picture of the Nextdoor app? Totally convicted me. I'm like, okay, I'll scroll past the political and start looking just to have eyes to see so many needs around us. And if you are thinking, okay, Aaron, what you're talking about, this sounds really great. We have no time for this. It might mean you're too busy. I think Christian families should be marked by having margin in our schedule. Margin, of course, to just be with our kids at home, just to be around. But I also think as a family, our kids should have margin in their schedule so that we can be other-centered. If you are scheduled every day, every night, now I know there's good things. I mean, believe me, with 5 kids, I've done every sport you could possibly imagine, so I get that. But if we don't limit and have boundaries on those things, and we're out every night doing all the things, every day, every weekend, when someone has a baby or someone needs a meal or someone needs something, it's a burden because we're like, I don't have time. So be a family that has margin. Purposely put margin in your schedule. Look at your calendar and block it out. The last thing I want to say is just as we are in this world and the activities that we do, that we look at them as ministry opportunities. So I even mean in your sports teams, telling our kids, hey, just signed you up for baseball. Probably most people on your team are not going to be Christians. So we should look for opportunities to serve and talk and get to know these families. And telling our kids, we are missionaries in this culture. So having conversations, being intentional about it. On all the teams my kids are on, I always make them go and say thank you to the coach after every practice. Why? Because most of the coaches, probably some of you in here have coached, you're volunteer. You are giving your time. So I tell my kids, do you think they didn't have anything better to do? No. They love you guys. They love this. They want it. So go say thank you. Almost 99.9% of the time, my kids are the only ones who ever thank their coaches, their teachers, anyone. So even that can be a way in this culture to completely stand out, right? And most recently on my son's flag football team, he just finished a season, and we talked to them about looking for opportunities to be kind or whatever. And the boys on the team, their culture is just, Darwinist, dog eat dog, make fun. If anyone makes a mistake, they're razzed, that sort of thing. So Jonah notices this, how they always beat up on each other. So he tries to purposely be encouraging. So he'll go up and pat a guy on the back. It's okay, you missed the catch. It's all right, So he'll do things like that on purpose. This is, things we've talked about. And one of the boys on the team, the second to last game, said to Jonah, "You are the nicest person I've ever met in my whole life." Now he's 9, so he hasn't had an expansive life. But I was like, when Jonah told me that, I was like, dude, that is so awesome. And the only reason Jonah's the nicest person is because he wasn't ripping on him, So just even our posture with our kids of like, hey, we're missionaries. These people don't know Jesus. We do. So let's act like it, right? So I want to end with just, I forgot to show you guys that slide. Okay. So some resources. Of course, at Maven, we want to come alongside you as parents. My husband and I do the Maven Parent Podcast. We do a weekly podcast on all things culture and parenting. So things that come up, we did a whole series on discipline. We've done all kinds of different things. We try to just basically, what have we had to figure out as parents, and let's talk about it from a Christian worldview. At the Maven table, we have, on the topic of technology, which is huge, we have The Tech-Wise Family by Andy Crouch, and then he wrote with his daughter, The Tech-Wise Life, which is written for students. So if you have a teenager, this is a great book for them. So I want to end with just encouraging you and reading Matthew 5:13 through 16, which says, "You are the salt of the earth. But if the salt loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again? It is no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled underfoot. You are the light of the world. A town built on a hill cannot be hidden. Neither do people light a lamp and put it under a bowl. Instead, they put it on a stand, and it gives light to everyone in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven." So how do we be a light? Well, again, to go back to Susan Schaefer Macaulay's quote, one of the greatest powers for good is a family whose members respect each other and who have learned to function, however poorly, with the rich concepts of the Word of God gives us as human beings. It's almost incredible to think of the stabilizing effect ordinary families can have, not only for themselves, but as a light to a troubled generation. Be an ordinary family, right? And be a light, and man, is our generation troubled. So it's worth the intention that we do in our home, not only for our kids, but of course for the hurting people all around us.
Maven exists to help the next generation know truth, pursue goodness, and create beauty for the cause of Christ. To find out more, check out maventruth.com.